All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are diving into something pretty fascinating. It's called goal orientation theory.
Okay.
Now, we're not talking about those New Year's resolutions here. This is about really getting to the heart of what motivates you when you're trying to learn something new, particularly in school.
I see.
It's basically this framework that researchers have been developing over the past few decades.
Hmm.
Big names in this field like Ames, Dweck, Mayer, Nichols, all these people have
Oh,
contributed.
yeah, I've heard of those. Yeah.
It's really about trying to figure out, I guess, why some students seem to just really thrive and engage with learning while others maybe struggle a bit more.
Makes sense. Yeah. Like what makes some people tick in a learning environment?
Exactly. And the review that we are using as our guide for this deep dive is a really cool article by Kaplan and Mayer from 2007. It breaks down this whole theory.
Sounds comprehensive.
It is. And our goal today is to distill all the interesting, juicy, and relevant parts of this for you so that you can have a really good grasp on this theory without getting too bogged down in the nitty-gritty, super academic details.
I like it. Breaking it down for the everyday learner, so to
Yeah,
speak.
exactly.
One thing that's really interesting about this theory, even though it's had a huge influence on how we understand student motivation, is that the way we define certain aspects of it has actually kind of shifted over time.
Oh, interesting.
Research on motivation itself has evolved since this theory first emerged. So taking a close look at it now gives us this sort of up-to-date and hopefully clear picture of how we're thinking about goal orientation today.
Okay, cool. So it seems like at the heart of this whole theory, there are two main ways that students tend to approach their learning.
Right.
And those are called mastery goals and performance goals.
Yes. And you're right. That is like the core of it. The two main ways people, maybe not just students, tend to approach any learning goal. Now, there's been some back and forth among researchers about the best way to label these two.
Yeah, I bet.
For example, Brophy had some really good points about the terms themselves. But the general consensus really boils down to these two fundamental orientations, mastery and performance, and these ideas have been echoed by people like Ames and many others.
Cool. So let's break down these two. So if you are operating with mastery goals, what would be your main focus?
Okay, so with mastery goals, you're all about the learning process itself. You're really focused on understanding the material, developing new skills, seeing yourself improve over time. It's all about that personal growth and the satisfaction of grasping something new, not about how you compare to others.
Oh, I see. So it's more about that internal drive to really get it.
Exactly. Like it's the aha moment that motivates you, not necessarily the gold star or the pat on the back.
Cool. And I'm guessing from what I've read that this approach tends to lead to some pretty good things in your learning journey.
You are absolutely right. There are tons of studies going way back to work in K-12 education that have shown this positive link between mastery goals and higher achievement in the classroom.
I mean, that intuitively makes sense. If you are interested, you are going to learn more.
Right. What's super interesting is this connection is even stronger when you're dealing with open-ended tasks.
Hmm.
Things like projects and assignments that really need you to think deeply, as Barron and Harakovich found in their work.
Right, right. So it's not just about memorizing facts. It's about applying them and understanding them deeply.
Exactly. It's about that deeper level of processing that leads to true mastery.
Now, the review talks about this really interesting meta-analysis, which for anyone listening who might not be familiar, is basically like a big study that looks at a whole bunch of other studies on a particular topic.
Oh yeah, meta-analyses are super helpful for getting the big picture.
Right. And this one found a moderate overall benefit to focusing on mastery goals in terms of your overall performance compared to performance goals.
Now that's pretty significant when you think about it. Even if your main concern is getting good grades or doing well on tests, focusing on the learning itself seems to be a more reliable path to that.
Right. And it gets even more interesting because they found that this benefit was even stronger in certain specific
You
situations.
bet. Mastery goals were especially helpful for tackling complex tasks that involved problem solving, which, let's be honest, a lot of real-world learning is like that, right?
Absolutely.
And it was also particularly advantageous for older students, like young adults, and especially when they were learning alongside their peers, which is, of course, the typical classroom setting.
So there's something about that social element that makes mastery goals even more effective, which makes you think about the whole dynamic of group projects and collaborative learning.
Totally. There's something about engaging with the material alongside others that seems to amplify those positive effects of mastery goals. Maybe it's the shared struggle, the bouncing ideas off each other, or the different perspectives that come into play. Whatever it is, it's a fascinating area to consider.
It really makes you think about the design of learning environments. Are we setting things up to foster that collaborative mastery, or are we kind of inadvertently pushing people towards just trying to outperform each other?
Yeah, that's a great point. The structure of the classroom, the types of tasks, the way feedback is given, all of that plays into whether mastery or performance goals are more likely to take center stage.
Right. So it seems like in a lot of ways, aiming for mastery, aiming for understanding is a really strong strategy, regardless of your age or the specific task you're facing. It's almost like aiming for understanding actually gets you the results you want, perhaps even more effectively than directly chasing those results.
It's like the process itself leads to the outcome, which is pretty cool when you think about it.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about performance goals. What's the main driver for someone who is operating with those?
All right, so with performance goals, the focus really shifts away from your own internal learning to how your abilities are viewed by others. Your main goal becomes showcasing your competence, doing better than your peers, and, most importantly, avoiding looking less capable. It's more about how you stack up against others, not about the learning itself.
So it's like the classic straight-A student syndrome. It's all about those external markers of achievement.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The motivation comes from external validation and recognition, rather than from that internal satisfaction of mastering something new.
And it sounds like, from what I remember from the review, the research on performance goals hasn't been as consistently positive. It's more of a mixed bag.
You got it. Initially, findings on how performance goals were related to positive learning outcomes were kind of all over the place. It wasn't clear if they were good, bad, or somewhere in between.
Interesting.
But then researchers, Elliott's work is really key here, started to realize that there was this important distinction within performance goals that was kind of getting overlooked.
Ah, okay. And that distinction is the approach versus avoidance idea, right?
Exactly. It's not just about wanting to perform well. It's about why you want to perform well. Are you approaching success or trying to avoid failure? That makes a big difference.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So break that down a little bit for us. What are performance approach goals and performance avoidance goals?
All right. So performance approach goals are all about striving for success, showing off your skills, being the best. Think of it like wanting to get the highest grade in the class to prove to everyone how smart you are.
Yeah, I think we all know someone like that. It's all about that external validation, that sense of being top dog.
Right. It's like collecting those trophies, those external markers of success to boost your ego.
Okay, and then what about performance avoidance goals? What's driving those?
All right. Performance avoidance goals are all about trying to avoid looking bad, messing up, being seen as incompetent. Your main concern isn't necessarily being the best, but rather not being the worst. It's more about fear of failure than a desire for success.
It's like that feeling of, I just want to blend in and not stand out for the wrong reasons.
Exactly. You're not necessarily striving for greatness. You're just trying to avoid negative judgment and stay under the radar.
Okay, that's super clear. So how do these two different types of performance goals, approach and avoidance, tend to play out? What are the consequences for your learning experiences?
Well, when it comes to performance avoidance goals, the research is pretty clear.
Okay.
They've been linked to a whole bunch of negative outcomes, like low self-efficacy, that belief in your own abilities, increased anxiety when facing challenges, not wanting to ask for help even when you desperately need it, and even self-handicapping, which is basically creating obstacles for yourself so you have an excuse if you fail.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes sense. You're so afraid of failing that you actually set yourself up to fail.
It's a self-protection mechanism, but ultimately, that doesn't really help you learn or grow. It's more about protecting your ego than actually achieving anything.
And not surprisingly, these goals have been linked to lower grades, as Herdan, Ryan, Anderman, and Geen found in their research.
Right, which kind of reinforces the idea that focusing too much on avoiding failure isn't a great recipe for success. It's likely to create this self-fulfilling prophecy where you end up performing poorly because you're so focused on not performing poorly.
Okay, so performance avoidance goals seem like a pretty clear path to unhappiness and underachievement. What about performance approach goals? Are those any better for you?
Well, here's where things get a little more complicated, and honestly, it's still an ongoing debate among researchers.
Go.
Some studies have actually found links between performance approach goals and certain positive outcomes, like persisting longer on tasks and even achieving higher grades, which On the surface, seems like a good thing,
Yeah,
right?
you think so.
But other research has also linked performance approach goals to some negative outcomes, things like heightened anxiety, more disruptive behavior in class, and this tendency to focus on just memorizing information rather than truly understanding it.
So you might be motivated to get good grades, but maybe not really internalize the material or develop a deep understanding of the subject matter.
Exactly. The focus is on demonstrating your ability, which can lead you to prioritize strategies that make you look smart in the short term, but might not actually benefit your learning in the long run. It's about playing the game of school, not necessarily about genuinely engaging with the learning itself.
And here's the kicker. There's also the risk that performance approach goals can morph into performance avoidance goals, especially if you start doubting your abilities or think you might fail, which Middleton, Kaplan, and Midgley's work highlights.
Right. It's like you're riding this wave of success, but as soon as you hit a bump, the fear of failure takes over, and suddenly you're more concerned with avoiding looking bad than with actually achieving your goals.
Okay, so performance approach goals might seem good on the surface, but they're not without their downsides, and they might even backfire on you if you're not careful.
Exactly. It's a complex picture, and the overall benefits of performance approach goals in education are still a hot topic of debate among those who study motivation.
It's super interesting how these different motivations can have such a big impact on how we learn and how we feel about ourselves. It's not just about what we learn, it's about why we're learning it in the first place.
Absolutely. The motivation behind the learning can be just as important as the learning itself. It shapes how we approach challenges, how we respond to feedback, and ultimately, how much we get out of the whole experience.
Okay. Now, the review also briefly touches on this idea of applying approach versus avoidance, not just to performance goals, but also to mastery goals.
Yes, that's a newer area of research that's getting some attention.
So, talk about that a little bit. How does that work?
So the idea here is that you could have what are called mastery approach goals, where you're really driven to fully understand something, master a skill, dig deep into the material.
Yeah.
And then you could have mastery avoidance goals, where you're more focused on avoiding misunderstanding or not getting something perfectly.
So, it's still about learning and mastery, but it's framed in terms of what you're trying to avoid, not what you're trying to achieve.
Precisely. It's like you're motivated by this fear of not being competent, not being good enough, even within the realm of mastery.
Interesting. So it's like even with mastery goals, there's this underlying tension between wanting to be good and wanting to avoid being bad.
Exactly. It's like those two forces, approach and avoidance, are always at play, even when we're talking about something as seemingly positive as wanting to master a skill.
Okay, so it seems like the main action in this theory is around mastery versus performance and then the approach versus avoidance, especially within performance goals. But I'm guessing the theory doesn't start there.
You are absolutely right. While mastery and performance goals have been the stars of the show, researchers have also explored other motivations that might be going on for students in learning environments.
Okay, cool. What are some examples of those?
Well, one area is social goals, which are basically the goals you have around your relationships with other people and how you fit into the social scene at school. Things like wanting to be popular, having close friends, or avoiding being rejected or excluded.
Yeah, those social dynamics can be a huge part of the school experience, especially for younger students. It's like their whole world revolves around those social interactions.
Absolutely. And while we intuitively know that those social goals can impact how students approach their learning, the research in this area, compared to mastery and performance goals, is still relatively limited. We're still figuring out how those social motivations interact with the desire to learn and achieve.
And then there's this other concept called work avoidance or academic alienation, which I think is something that probably everyone who's ever been a student can relate to at some point.
Oh, for sure. This is the classic, I just want to do the bare minimum and get out of here attitude.
Yeah, it's like the goal isn't to succeed or even to avoid failure. It's just to avoid work altogether, or at least to minimize the effort you have to put in.
Exactly. And researchers like Archer and Nichols and their colleagues have found some pretty consistent negative patterns associated with this type of orientation, both in terms of how students think and feel about school and, of course, their actual performance.
Which makes sense. If you're not putting in the effort, you're probably not going to see the results.
Right. It's like a self-perpetuating cycle. You disengage because you don't see the value,
Hmm.
and then you don't see the value because you're disengaged. It's a tough spot to be in.
Now, here's a question. Wouldn't someone with work avoidance goals behave similarly to someone with performance avoidance goals? Like both of them wouldn't be putting in much effort.
Great question. And that's where it gets interesting. Even though the behaviors might look similar on the surface, the underlying reasons are totally different.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Like for students who are academically alienated, their sense of self-worth and their interests often lie outside of school. They're not necessarily afraid of failing academically. They just don't see school as relevant or meaningful to their lives.
I see. So it's not about protecting their ego, it's about not seeing the point in the first place.
Exactly. And studies have actually found low correlations between these two types of avoidance goals, which supports this idea that they're really distinct motivations. Skalvik's work has been really important in highlighting this difference.
That's fascinating how you can have these seemingly similar behaviors, like not putting in effort, but driven by totally different underlying motivations.
It really underscores the importance of understanding the why behind the behavior. It's not enough to just look at what people are doing. You have to try to get at the underlying beliefs and goals that are driving those actions.
Okay, so this is giving us a much clearer picture of the different things that can be motivating students, and honestly, probably all of us, not just students in a learning environment.
Right. I think these ideas resonate far beyond the classroom.
Now, another question. How do researchers actually figure out what goal orientation someone has? What are the methods they use to study this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Goal orientations have been primarily investigated in two ways. One is by looking at them as temporary states that are influenced by the specific situation you're in.
Oh, okay.
Think of it like trying to create a task where the focus is either on learning and improvement or on comparing yourself to others.
Right, right.
Researchers can manipulate those situational cues to see how it affects people's goals and their behavior.
So you're basically creating a learning environment that either primes people for mastery or for performance.
Exactly. And then the other way goal orientations have been studied, which has become increasingly common, is as more stable individual tendencies or traits.
Okay.
So things that are relatively consistent across different situations. And those are typically assessed through surveys where you or other students would rate how much you agree with different statements about your goals.
Yeah, like those personality quizzes you see online.
Kind of, but more focused on your goals and achievement settings.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also been some, although it's less common, qualitative research that tries to understand these concepts more deeply.
Okay, like interviews or observations.
Exactly. Getting at the nuances of how people experience and talk about their goals in their own words.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit more about those surveys. If you were to take a survey about your goal orientations, what kind of questions might you come across?
Well, early surveys often focused on your beliefs about what makes you feel successful in school.
Mm-hmm.
They might have items starting with, I feel most successful if,
Mm-hmm.
and then you'd choose from different options, like I get a good grade, or I understand the material really well, or I do better than other students.
So it's about trying to get at your underlying definition of success.
Exactly. What are you striving for when you walk into the classroom?
Okay. And then how did those surveys evolve over time?
Well, later surveys took a more direct approach, simply asking you about your reasons for doing schoolwork, what your main goals are, what motivates you in the classroom.
So instead of asking about what makes you feel successful, they're asking you straight up what you're aiming for.
Right. It's a more direct measure of your goal orientation. But some researchers have argued that maybe these direct questions are tapping more into your specific short-term objectives rather than the broader underlying purpose that guides those objectives.
Oh, I see. So it's like you might say your goal is to get an A on the next test, but that might be driven by a deeper desire to prove your competence or to avoid disappointing your parents. Or maybe it's just a stepping stone to getting into college.
Exactly. The direct question might not capture the full complexity of your motivation.
And the review mentions that some surveys have even included questions about your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors related to learning.
Yes, Skalvik's work is a great example of this. These surveys try to get at your whole experience as a learner. They might ask you about what you worry about, what you typically do in class, what makes you feel like you've really succeeded, and how important different aspects of learning are to you.
So it's not just about your goals, it's about your whole mental and emotional landscape as a learner.
Exactly. They're trying to get a more holistic picture of what motivates you.
And the inclusion of these broader aspects has led to some debate among researchers about what actually counts as a goal orientation versus just an outcome of having that goal orientation.
Right. So is saying, I keep trying even when things get difficult, actually a measure of having a mastery goal? Or is it a behavior that results from having a mastery goal.
That's a tricky one. I can see how that would be hard to tease apart.
Exactly. And it's a question that researchers are still grappling with.
So even with surveys, which seem like a pretty straightforward way to measure something, it's not always that simple.
You got it. There are subtle nuances and complexities that can make it difficult to get a truly precise measure of something as subjective as your motivation.
And I'm guessing from what you were saying earlier about how the definition of goal orientation has evolved, there are probably different researchers who have had slightly different ideas about what should and shouldn't be included in a survey measure.
Absolutely. A study by Smith and his colleagues actually compared 3 commonly used survey measures of goal orientation. And while they found general agreement in how they measured mastery, performance approach, and performance avoidance goals, they also noticed some interesting differences, particularly in how they measured performance avoidance. Some surveys focus more on this idea of trying to manage how others see you, while others focus more on your fear of failure.
It's like they're both getting at this idea of avoiding looking bad, but they're coming at it from slightly different angles.
Right. One is more about impression management. The other is more about this deep-seated anxiety about not being good enough.
Okay, so lots of different ways to measure something as seemingly simple as your goals. But despite all that, surveys have been super useful, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely. They've been invaluable for helping us understand the connections between your goal orientations and other important aspects of your academic life, like how well you regulate your own learning, how you think about yourself as a learner, and your overall well-being. The work of Pintrich and Kaplan has been particularly influential in this area.
Right. They've helped us see how these different motivations can have a ripple effect on all sorts of things.
Exactly. It's not just about your goals in isolation. It's about how those goals fit into the bigger picture of your learning and your life.
Now, the review also mentions that there are some potential downsides to relying too heavily on surveys. What are some of the things we need to be cautious about?
Yeah, that's a good point. Surveys are a great tool, but they're not perfect. One of the big things to be mindful of is that they inherently make certain assumptions that aren't always acknowledged or even obvious.
Like, what kind of assumptions?
Well, one of the biggest ones is this idea that a particular survey question means the same thing to every student, regardless of their background, their culture, their personal experiences.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Your interpretation of a question about your goals could be totally different depending on your upbringing, your values, your social context.
Right. And research by Erdan and McInerney and his colleagues, particularly in cross-cultural settings, has really highlighted this issue. The meaning we ascribe to things isn't universal. It's shaped by our cultural lens.
Okay, so we need to be careful about assuming that surveys are capturing these objective truths about people's motivations. It's more nuanced than that.
Exactly. It's about understanding that those responses are filtered through the individual's unique perspective and their cultural lens.
Okay, cool. Now let's shift gears and talk about the other main way that researchers study goal orientation. Experimental research. How does that approach work?
Okay, so with experiments, instead of just measuring existing goal orientations, researchers actually try to create specific learning conditions that are designed to either encourage mastery goals or performance goals.
Oh, interesting. So they're manipulating the learning environment to see how that impacts people's motivations.
Exactly. For example, in conditions designed to promote mastery goals, the instructions might really emphasize that the purpose of the task is to learn and improve your understanding.
Okay.
Whereas in a performance goal condition, they might highlight comparing your performance to other people or emphasize getting the best score.
So they're kind of subtly nudging people towards one type of goal or the other by framing the task in a certain way.
Precisely. And the review actually includes some specific examples of how researchers have done this, which can be pretty interesting to look at if you're curious about the nitty-gritty of experimental design.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how they word those instructions to really prime people for one goal orientation or the other.
It's really subtle, but those subtle cues can have a big impact on how people approach the task.
Okay, so they set up these different conditions, and then what? What do they look at?
Well, they typically measure a bunch of different things, like how well people perform on the task, how much effort they put in, their persistence when they encounter challenges, their emotional responses to the task, and, of course, their self-reported goal orientations.
So they're trying to see how those manipulated goal orientations actually play out in terms of people's behaviors, their feelings, and their overall performance.
Exactly. It's about testing those causal links. Do those induced goal orientations actually lead to the outcomes we predict based on the theory?
And what have these experiments generally shown?
Well, one of the consistent findings has been that when learning situations are structured to promote mastery goals, people tend to perform better on complex tasks that require deeper thinking, as Graham and Golan found in their work.
Yeah, that's consistent with what we were talking about earlier with surveys, right? Mastery goals seem to be good for deep learning.
Exactly. It's like those mastery conditions encourage you to engage with the material in a more thoughtful and meaningful way.
And the review mentions this interesting study by Butler that looked at the impact of pressure on these different goal orientations. What did they find?
Oh, that's a cool study. They found that the benefits of those mastery-focused learning environments were actually greatest when there was a moderate level of pressure, like a little bit of a challenge, but not overwhelming.
Okay.
Whereas performance-focused conditions tended to create a really high-pressure environment, which actually seemed to hinder learning. It's like that pressure to perform well actually got in the way of people's ability to really engage with the material.
So it's almost like a little bit of pressure can be good for motivating you to try hard, but too much pressure can actually backfire and make you choke.
That's a great way to put it. It's that classic Yerkes-Dodson law. A little bit of arousal is good for performance, but too much can lead to a decline.
Okay, so experiments are good at showing this cause and effect relationship between learning conditions and goal orientations, but I'm guessing they're not perfect either. There are limitations to what experiments can tell us.
Of course. Like any research method, experiments have their strengths and weaknesses.
So what are some of the limitations of experimental research in this area?
Well, one limitation is that even when they create these carefully controlled conditions, they can't fully explain why not everyone responds in the expected way. Like, even in a mastery-focused environment, some people might still get really anxious or focus on comparing themselves to others.
Right, you can't completely control for individual differences. People are going to bring their own baggage and their own predispositions to the experiment, regardless of how you set things up.
Absolutely. And that's one of the challenges of trying to isolate these causal relationships in a lab setting. Real life is messy, and people are complex.
Another limitation, I'm guessing, is that while experiments can show that a particular manipulation leads to a particular outcome, they can't really tell us whether that outcome has the same meaning for everyone.
You're spot on.
Right.
Like, if a mastery-focused condition leads to better performance on a task, does that mean everyone in that condition is experiencing the same kind of learning or the same level of satisfaction? Not necessarily.
Right. And of course, there's the issue of ecological validity. Experiments, by their very nature, are often quite artificial. They happen in controlled lab settings that might not fully capture the complexities of real-world classrooms and learning environments.
You got it. There's always that question of, okay, this worked in a lab, but will it work in a real classroom with all the distractions and the social dynamics and the real-world pressures?
Right. It's a valid concern. But despite those limitations, experiments have been super important, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely. They've been crucial in establishing the link between goal orientations and a whole range of outcomes. And that's a big reason why this theory has had such a huge influence on how we think about teaching and learning. They've provided that solid empirical foundation that allows us to say, hey, this stuff really matters. It has a real impact on how students learn.
Okay, so both surveys and experiments have their place in helping us understand goal orientation. Now, the authors of the review argue that we need to go beyond just those two methods to get a truly comprehensive picture of what's going on with student motivation.
Exactly. They're calling for a more diverse range of research methods.
So what are some examples of other methods that researchers could use?
Well, they suggest things like actually observing students in their natural learning environments, in real classrooms, to see how those goal orientations play out in those complex settings. And they also talk about using Think Aloud protocols, where you have students verbalize their thoughts as they're working on a task, which can give you a window into their cognitive processes and their real-time motivations.
Oh, that's interesting. So you can actually hear what's going on in their heads as they're learning.
Exactly. It's a way to get beyond just their behaviors and their self-reports and actually hear how they're making sense of the task and what's driving them.
And they also suggest analyzing conversations, like the actual dialogue that happens between students and teachers, to see how those goals are discussed, negotiated, and maybe even challenged in those social interactions.
Right. It's about recognizing that learning doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Hmm.
It's embedded in these social contexts, and those social contexts can shape our goals and our motivations in really powerful ways.
And they even mention using more in-depth approaches, like looking at students' learning histories, conducting ethnographic studies to really understand the broader cultural context that shapes their motivations.
Exactly. It's about taking that holistic view, recognizing that those individual goal orientations don't exist in a bubble. They're shaped by all these different factors, from their personal experiences to their cultural background to the specific dynamics of their classroom.
Okay, so lots of different ways to explore this, and it seems like the message is don't just rely on one method. Use a variety of approaches to get a richer and more nuanced understanding of what's going on with students' motivations.
Absolutely. And the key is to be really thoughtful about what each method can tell us, what its strengths and limitations are, and how it shapes our understanding of these complex ideas.
Okay, cool. So we've talked about the different types of learning goals students might have, and we've talked about how researchers try to understand them. Now, let's get to an even more fundamental question that the review itself poses. What is a goal orientation at its core? Like, what are we actually talking about when we use that term?
Yeah, this is where the theory gets really interesting and philosophical because it forces us to grapple with this idea of what those goal orientations actually are. Are they primarily a result of the situation we're in? Are they more like fixed personality traits that we carry with us from one situation to the next? Or is it something else entirely?
It's like, where does the motivation actually reside? Is it in the environment, in the individual, or maybe in the interaction between the two?
Exactly. And the answer to that question has huge implications for understanding how motivation develops, how it might change over time, and how we can create learning environments that foster those positive adaptive motivations in students.
Okay, so the review highlights two main perspectives on this, right? Goal.